Hello and welcome to Penguin Book Club. Today we'll be chatting about one of my favourite books, Louisa May Alcott's Little Women. I'd like to firstly welcome Susanna Fullerton as our resident queen of the classics at Penguin's Book Club. Susanna has been president of the Jane Austen Society of Australia for the past 18 years. She's also patron of the Kipling Society of Australia and a founding member of the New South Wales Dickens Society and of the Australian Bronte Association. And she's a member of the Dylan Thomas Society of Australia. Susanna is Sydney's best-known lecturer on classic novels, and she lectures regularly at the Art Gallery of New South Wales. Welcome, Susanna.
Hi.
I'd also like to welcome Sarah Burns, President of the Australian Bronte Association, and Louise. Oh, hello. Sorry. And Louise Owens, author of the blog readmeblogsite.net. And of course, we'd also like to welcome back all our book club members who are watching our Hangout on air. And now to the book. Little Women is the story of Jo, Meg, Beth and Amy March, four sisters living with their mother in New England. Their father is away in the Civil War. The family recently lost its fortune and their beloved mother struggles to support them and keeping their household. In the process, all the sisters become very close friends with their wealthy neighbour, Theodore Lawrence, known as Laurie. As the girls grow older, each faces her own challenges. Jo, our beloved heroine, must tame her boyish ways and outspokenness while she struggles to be a great writer. Meg must put aside her love of finery and wealth in order to follow her heart. And Beth must conquer ill health and her bashfulness, while Amy, the youngest, has to sacrifice her pride. Through all this, the girls are guided by their mother, Marmee, and by their religious faith. Drama ensues as we follow the lives of the March sisters and their loves, trials, and in some cases their sad demise. And this is a book that really captures everyone's heart. Susanna?
Oh, it's such a joy to be discussing Little Women, a book I have loved for as long as I can possibly remember. Louisa May Alcott was born in the year 1832, and she always knew she wanted to be a writer. But what she tended to write was sort of gothic shock horror literature. That's what really interested her, and she started to send off stories to magazines and try to get herself published as an author of really quite thrilling and often rather unbelievable stories. Eventually, she went off to serve as a nurse in the American Civil War. She became terribly sick and nearly died as a result of that experience. But she published a book called Hospital Sketches about her time working as a nurse, and that sold very well. Then she got a position helping on a children's magazine, and she wrote stories for children. And one day the editor said to her, "Now, why don't you try and write a book for girls?" And Louisa said, "Oh, I don't like girls much, I prefer boys," just like her heroine Jo, who eventually establishes a school for boys. But the publisher kept encouraging her to try, and eventually she went home and she started to write Little Women. Now, she gave the publisher the beginning of what she had written. He didn't think very much of it, but fortunately he took it home and he handed it to his young daughter and said, "Have a look at this and see if you like it." The daughter, as so many other girls before and since, have found, that they just adored this story. And so the publisher thought, right, I've got something going here, I will publish it. And so in the year 1868, Little Women was published. She followed that up with sequels, Good Wives, Little Men, and Jo's Boys. There was a constant demand for sequels because the book sold extremely well. And although she did continue to write the sort of gothic horror ones that have always been her first love, it's for Little Women that she is remembered today. That's the book that has become an absolute classic. Now, it's an American classic, but why is this book American? Obviously there's the setting of the American Civil War, but what else defines this book as an American novel rather than a British Victorian novel?
It's a good question.
Louise, you had something, I think, about the sort of attitudes and class.
There's a scene at a picnic where they discuss the role of the tutor and the governess, and the European visitor is quite surprised at the way the governess and the tutors are accepted in America, and she says this certainly isn't the way that's accepted in Europe, and I think that's a really telling clue. It was must have been very appealing and thought a bit maybe revolutionary. That these people have a lot to offer, of course, and should be accepted absolutely as they are in America. I thought that was a really interesting social comment that for the contemporary reader to kind of be aware of that.
Even though there's it's obviously, there's a lot of religious morality and family. There's a modernity to it. There's the women themselves, the way they think and act. They're very independent and they're very willing to sort of step out into the world in some cases, like Jo, which I think is just very different to the sort of heroines we read in our Victorian novels.
Is Jo going off to live in a boarding house in the big city? Would be very unusual in an 1860s novel in England, I think. Very unusual. So it shows her resilience and the fact that perhaps American women had a little bit more freedom than did English women of the era.
And if you think of the story that Jo writes with Rodrigo, it's very dramatic and very seductive. There's all sorts of things happening there. You don't get that in the English novels, I think, at that time. I mean, it might be suggested, but not the details. It's not quite as bold as Jo story.
We have in this novel 4 sisters, Meg, Jo, Beth and Amy. And I think probably I'm right in saying that most girls reading this novel identify most with Jo. But do you all have a favourite amongst the sisters? And if Jo's your favourite, which one did you identify with most when you were growing up? And does that change over time? What about you, Sarah? Who's your favourite?
I'm the eldest, so I suppose it would be Meg. I'm the eldest of 4 sisters. And Beth, well, in the book she's the second youngest. In the film she's the youngest, and your heart goes out for her. But there's I think all the different personalities. I love Jo, but I think Meg and I, being the eldest, are probably more alike.
Well, I'm a third daughter, so that would make me Beth.
Oh no.
Youngest daughter, so maybe that makes me Amy. I don't know whether I had a favourite. I think I was pretty surprised about Jo and thought she was very courageous and definitely admired her, but I don't know whether I would have related as much to her. Yeah.
I think I had a lot of fellow feeling for Meg, wanting the pretty dresses and wanting to go to parties, and so I think possibly Meg was my next favourite after Jo. Although I'd also, of course, adored Beth. And when I went to Orchard House and I saw the piano that had been the real Elizabeth's piano, and I thought of Beth and I thought of Elizabeth Olcott, I wept just at the sight of the piano. It was too much for me. So they're all wonderfully moving sisters in what they have to go through and what they manage to conquer in the course of the novel. Earlier, you were talking about the morality of this book, and it is a very moral book, and it's also a very religious book. How do you feel that a young reader of today is going to respond to the religiosity of this book?
When I first read it as a teenager, I loved it. When I read it probably in my late 20s, early 30s, I did think it was a little bit preachy. There's kind of lesson after lesson after lesson after lesson. And I put it aside for a while, but having recently read it, I just loved it. I love those little gems. I love those little lessons in life and gently put forward. I think it's a fabulous book.
I think with the Pilgrim's Progress coming in so early in the story as well, and that being the basis for how they should conduct it, we've lost that. Our modern readers don't read the Pilgrim's Progress. So, but obviously it was an important moral touchstone for them at that time, and was a very the fact that they all got their own copy, that was very important.
A friend of mine thinks Marmee is desperately lacking in imagination. All 4 of her daughters the same Christmas present.
But
is a hugely important book for this novel. The chapter titles, most of them come from Pilgrim's Progress. Meg goes to Vanity Fair, Joe meets Apollyon. So it's really in many ways a sort of modern rewrite of the Pilgrim's Progress. But the essential difference is that it's female pilgrims, not male, and showing these women coping in a world where there are no men. Father, who's a bit of an impractical dreamer anyway, has gone off to the war. It's 4 daughters, 1 mother, and a female servant, and Aunt March. So it's a very female world in this novel, and these women are having to cope without the men that they have been used to having around. So it is very much a female Pilgrim's Progress. Sarah, do you find it too religious, this novel?
Not at all. I think it's interesting. It's probably a modern reader may not understand that or like that, but I think of its time. It reflects its time, and that was the way they had to conduct themselves. But they didn't let it stop them. They were out there doing what they wanted to do, and I think they had a pretty free time, but they were good girls too.
Yes.
I thought it was interesting the way that the structure, maybe the men in their lives had moved away or dissipated for the moment, so they had to kind of find beacons and structure. And I think in the end they kind of came back to the religion and thought, actually, this is not such a bad thing. It gave them reason.
I think there's also a lovely nostalgia to that time, reading it now, of the simplicity of decisions and that we really lack nowadays in our very sort of world of many choices. Not that I'm saying, I wanted to live in that time, but there's just something so lovely about having this morality that threads through your life that you could always turn to in times of chaos.
You mean you don't do tight lacing when you go to a ball?
Maybe, but I don't.
But there's a lot of humour in this story too, thinking about the ball and Joe's burnt dress.
Yes.
A lot of humour and
the hair that gets singed and all the very wonderful domestic problems that we get in this novel. And just right from the very beginning with the opening Christmas scene, Christmas won't be Christmas without any presents, and we see them giving away their Christmas feast and coping on Christmas Day with worries, with poverty, and yet with great love and affection. What are your views of Marmee? Is Marmee the ideal mother in fiction?
She was just my mum. So for me, it's so easy to love her. That woman who seemed sort of inconsequential if you put her out into the world, but had this strength and courage that was, beyond fail, and who lived and loved for her children and her family, and was strong and able. And so to me, I'm always cheering her on. I love her.
She's actually then reflected that the children have been brought up in that image. I mean, she's brought them up well, and they're good people because of the influence of her. She can leave them because she knows that they'll do the right thing and look after each other and others.
Now, I was saying how few men there are in the novel, but of course, memorably, one enters from next door, Laurie Lawrence. And we see Laurie actually learning from the women. He's lonely, he's got a rather sad, privileged life, but a rather sad one. And he becomes really, in many ways, a part of the family. Now, I know when I first read the novel, and on most rereadings, I longed for Laurie to marry Joe. I felt that they were just right. And, of course, that doesn't happen. So how did you feel about that in Good Wives when Joe marries her middle-aged German professor instead of rich, charming, handsome, young, gorgeous Laurie Lawrence?
It's the second most tragic non-pairing I've ever seen, apart from Harry Potter and Hermione Granger. It was like, no.
So you were frustrated.
Yes. Although, only because of the movie version when Gabrielle Byrne played, the old did I go, oh, okay, I understand that now. But at the time when I was reading the book, I was heartbroken.
Joe needed more from a partner. I think.
Well, that's what her mother tells her, isn't it?
I think Teddy needed Joe more than Joe needed Teddy. Yeah, Laurie.
Yeah, yeah, he's both names, isn't he?
Oh, I was desperately
called Teddy.
Yes.
But she needs somebody who would stimulate her and encourage her and challenge her, which I don't think Laurie would have done. I mean, he adored her, but she just didn't see him in that light. And whereas Amy could benefit from his...
Joe was never going to be that servile wife at home, tending to his needs and being in society. So it was never going to work.
I just thought that'd be great, though. I just wanted them to marry so much. I thought that would be a great book.
We'll have to rewrite Little Women.
Yes.
Louisa May Alcott, of course, didn't want to marry Joe to anybody at all, but there was so much pressure from her readers. Everybody wanted to know if Joe was going to marry Laurie, what was going to happen. They all wanted a romance. So really she put it in under protest, and I think she was protesting to the end. She thought, well, all you girls want a handsome, gorgeous man to marry the heroine, but I'm actually going to give you a middle-aged hero who's foreign and poor and, all these other issues. And I think it was her form of protest as she wrote the novel.
Well, that proposal scene in the rain is just beautiful. Yeah, and they both were scruffy. He had, his gloves didn't have the fingers in. They both looked like tramps almost. They just were oblivious, and I think it's beautifully written and read. So she might have protested, but she did a good job.
She did. Now, of course, we've got a sort of Australian version of Little Women in Seven Little Australians, which is hugely influenced by this novel. There's an elder sister called Meg who puts on corsets and tightly laces herself. There's a wild Joe figure in Judy. So in many ways, I think Ethel Turner was very influenced by Little Women in creating an Australian version of the novel. So it has been a very, very important book indeed. It's also, of course, been filmed many times. So do you have favourites amongst the film versions? There's been so many of them.
Well, I like the June Allison one with that wonderful cast. Peter Lawford as Laurie. We've got Janet Leigh as Meg, Elizabeth Taylor as Amy, except that she's not the youngest in this. She's the second youngest, and Margaret O'Brien, who was just gorgeous.
That was a 1949 film version. But before that, the earliest version was a 1918 film version with an actress called Dorothy Barnard as Jo. I don't think that's even available today. Then there was a movie in 1933 which had Katharine Hepburn as Jo.
Yeah,
of course, the 1949 one with June Allison. Then there was a 1971 with Angela Down as Jo. A TV drama with the American actress Susan Day as Jo. And then the 1994 film with Winona Ryder as Jo. So there's been a great variety of Little Women's on screen.
Now, don't all scream, but I really like the Winona Ryder one.
So do I. I love it too.
Angela Byrne was gorgeous.
Is it a good movie? Yes. Is it true to the book? No.
They do make changes.
Yeah.
They do bring out some of the political aspects, which are quite interesting. The interest in the abolition and the slave trade, I think, comes out much more strongly in that film, and it's barely mentioned in any of the others. So, there's some interesting aspects to it, and I thought it made a beautiful movie.
It made a good movie. The only thing is, I do have a problem with most of the renditions of Little Women. The age of the actresses. Now, Amy is 12, and Meg at the end of the book is 17, and those actresses are not. And I think that really skews it. They look so mature, and when you read the book and you read the ages of the children, you think, wow, it really throws the whole style of the movie, I think. I mean, the girls are very, very young. They're all in high school.
But they are very mature girls for their age, aren't they?
They are.
They probably had to be.
Yes. So Another character that we haven't discussed is Aunt March, who, of course, is the rich relative. And we get quite a lot of snobbery coming in with her. You know, she doesn't want Meg to marry John Brooke, who's just a poor tutor in Good Wives. And she, of course, is an employer to Jo at the start of the novel. Jo is a companion to her and gets paid for doing that. Did you find Aunt March a comic character or just an unpleasant one? How did you respond to Aunt March? And her parrot. She's a parrot.
She's very eccentric, and to me, she had a lot of Dickens characteristics, kind of quirky, eccentric. Nicholas Nickleby, the Trotwood, Aunt Trotwood. She reminded me of Aunt Trotwood, a little bit out there. Very much spoke her mind, and I was interested that, you know, of course, on the rereading, I picked up that the four sisters had a club called the Pickwick Papers, which is because of their love of Dickens. And I thought, oh, I wonder if there's a little bit of a Dickens inspiration there.
A huge Dickens inspiration. And we'll be discussing Pickwick Papers on our book club next year. We'll be doing a hangout on the Pickwick Papers. And I think for many young readers, the reading Little Women is their first encounter with the Pickwick Papers. When you don't know Dickens's novel, you think, oh, who are these characters that they're acting with these strange names, Augustus Snodgrass and Mr. Pickwick? But once you read the Pickwick Papers, I think you gain a whole new appreciation of Little Women. So yes, the Dickensian element, and that's a really good point, Louise. It comes out with Aunt March. And I think with some of the humour in the novel, there's some Dickensian humour as well.
But it's interesting the relationship changes between Jo and Aunt March, and it's you know, Jo's fighting it all the time, but Aunt March is very good to Amy and takes her away, and she's a very good influence, and it's a different relationship, and I think it's probably been good for Aunt March as much as it's good for Amy.
You're right. Yeah, that's right. There's a lot to do about loyalties and relationships and growth. I think personal growth.
Now, Louisa May Alcott described this book as a domestic drama, and we certainly do get a lot of domestic detail, whether it's food, clothes, etiquette, gloves, letter writing, the rituals of Christmas. I think that's a huge charm of the book that makes it an historical lesson as well as a moral one, that we learn of these details about the lives of young women at this time. So what were some of your favourite aspects of the domesticity of this novel, the Little Women at home?
I loved it when they were putting all their presents together for their mommy, and just the care and the excitement, just that, and there were such special little things. And that joy, I remember when you'd go to, you know, Mother's Day stalls and buy her the most horrible soap you could find with your 10-cent coins and be so proud and so happy. And that, just that, as you say, that creation of something very real, a real beautiful domesticity that we all encounter every day, just makes it so believable that you are there. You're there with them.
I like sorry, Letitia.
No.
I like scenes, you know, these are things that they did every day. They, you know, the way that the breakfast was set, or the way that they all went up to bed, or the way the older girls hung back. You know, this was the way it was done. They had their own traditions and they had their Christmas thing. The other thing I liked about the domesticity, I thought it was very, very clever and very neat how it was from one Christmas to another Christmas. So it was kind of like almost like a diary of a year, and I thought that really brought home the domesticity. This is the March girls throughout the year. This is what they did throughout the season.
It's beautifully structured, isn't it?
Well, I think we all have to agree that it's just one of our favourite books.
I do have to ask, do you all have clean handkerchiefs with you girls? Mommy would be very upset if you don't, and I bet not one of us has got a clean hanky with us. But it's probably a very suitable time to wish everybody a very Merry Christmas, because this is a novel that starts and ends with Christmas scenes, and very memorable ones indeed, I think. So I'd just like to wish everybody who's watching this a very Merry Christmas, and may 2015 be a year absolutely filled with wonderful books. So Merry Christmas, everyone.
Thank you, Susanna. I mean, I'd like to thank everyone for joining us for Penguin Book Club today. This is actually our last Penguin Book Club, and we've certainly had a wonderful time sharing our thoughts and chatting about the great books of literature. Susanna, thank you for being our fearless leader in the classics. Sarah and Louise for joining us on many, many wonderful book discussions. Next year in 2015, we'll be forming the Classics Book Club, which you can follow on Susanna Fullerton's Plus page. It will include all the wonderful classics you love, and your friends here from Book Club will be there too. We'd love you to join us. Have a wonderful Christmas, and we hope your stockings are filled with many, many books. Thank you so much, everyone. Merry Christmas.
Merry Christmas.
Merry Christmas.